Hey, welcome back everyone to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 921, Black Politics. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust. There's a document description of the video for you to follow along with from reference. And I'm also here with my co-host and facilitator, Renaissance Man.
Hey, what's up, Mike? What's up, chat? Welcome back, everyone.
Chilling, man, chilling. Let's talk about cybersecurity for a second. I think what's happening in the economy is unpredictable. No one really could have foreseen that this new administration would come in and do the things that they're doing, despite the fact that there was some form of, prediction of, a dictatorship was coming. But no one knew that this would be the outcome as we see it today. Transfer that and pivot that to cybersecurity for national defense, and what we're seeing now is staffing cuts in cybersecurity, an industry that is understaffed by at least hundreds of thousands of roles. And so what we're looking at now is CISA bracing for more staffing cuts, deep staffing cuts. This is from Axios. Let's go into this really quickly. The Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency is looking to push out as much as a third of the agency's total headcount, in addition to contract personnel from a major threat hunting team, according to three sources familiar with the matter. Why it matters. The cuts likely to impact, quote, every single part of the agency, quote, one of those sources told Axios, dealing a huge blow to the country's cybersecurity posture following earlier rounds of layoffs and contract cuts. CISA is expected to start reducing its workforce through a second fork in the road email, two sources told Axios. That email could go out as soon as this weekend, but the specifics of the cuts keep changing, the sources said. Depending on how many people take the offer, the agency could then send out, quote, reduction in force notices at a later unspecified date, the source is added. CBS reports that the agency plans to cut as many as 1,300 employees. Another industry source told Axios that the cuts include 75 contract personnel who work on CISA's threat hunting operations, which searches for signs of vulnerabilities or breaches on civilian federal networks. Those personnel worked on threat hunt contracts with Nightwing, a cyber company that spun out of Raytheon last year, and technology services vendor Peraton. Most federal agencies don't have the budget or manpower to set up their own threat hunt teams, and CISA work to typically help identify hacking campaigns targeting the whole of the government. CISA declined to comment. No shit. Catch up quick. This is the latest to hit the nation's cyber defense agency during the second Trump administration. The agency has cut funding to several election security efforts, spurring concerns among state and local election officials who relied on the agency for that threat intelligence about adversaries targeting their elections. CISA said last month that it was terminating contracts where the agency has been able to find efficiencies and eliminate duplication of effort, including in its red team operations. And last month, CISA fired, then had to reinstate more than 130 probationary employees. The rumor cuts are already raising alarm bells on Capitol Hill. Representative Eric Swalwell of California, the ranking member of the House Homeland Security Committee Cyber Subcommittee, has already requested a briefing on CISA's workforce changes. Spokesperson Cassie Below told Axios in a statement. Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, ranking member of the House Homeland Security Committee, said in a statement to Axios that he is aware of the rumored plans and called the moves idiotic and irrational. Quote, Trump is intent to do to our security the same as what he's doing to our economy. Tank it, Thompson said. Even before the rumors of latest agency cuts started swirling, Rep. Andrew Barrino, chair of the House Homeland Security Committee's Cyber Subcommittee, said during an event in D.C. this week that he was not thrilled with some of the agency's previous firings. Congress has not yet scheduled a nomination hearing for Sean Plankley, Trump's pick to run the agency. So I think what we're seeing right now, now I have to be quite frank, is a disarmament of cyber defenses. And the reason why this is important is because if you make any major cuts inside cybersecurity, that in an organization, in an industry that's already understaffed, you're bound to miss a lot of things because there are a lot of vulnerabilities. There are a lot of manpower and man hours that are just under resourced right now. And to go in there and make cuts and say, well, there's duplicate work. Yeah, you always have overlapping work. You might have a senior person, and then you might have a principal engineer or a principal architect, or you might have, several analysts that work multiple shifts and so on and so forth. You always need eyes on glass because that's very important to your operational readiness. And so to say that, you're trying to, reduce headcount because you're looking for, efficiencies there, I kind of find that to be very dubious at best, primarily because everybody's overworked in cybersecurity. Everybody. There's no one person I have ever met and never heard of that said that, we got it easy. Everybody's hurting, for resource operational effectiveness. So it's not that easy to just cut heads and think that you can, dot a couple of I's and cross a couple of T's and make some X's and O's and on a piece of paper and think that that's going to solve something. That's really going to hurt your morality on your team. That's just, people may feel like they don't want to do anything anymore because they don't know, it's uncertain as to what's going to happen coming down the pike. Renaissance, what's your take on this and as to what you just heard?
Yeah, it's not good. Cyber is one of those places where you're seeing emerging threats constantly. My company, we are constantly getting, I remember one day, like everything just went down. They were like, oh yeah, we had a cyber hack and, it got through, I guess, the initial security protocol. So, I mean, you were talking about things like teams being down, really not being able to do any sort of work. Now, granted, it was resolved pretty quickly, but kind of gave you an insight into how much, private sector is constantly dealing with hacks and cybersecurity issues. So the fact that you're doing this in the government is, and you're talking about Homeland Security specifically, definitely should raise alarm bells. And government usually has problems. I mean, even private industry has problem with getting, the best and most talented cybersecurity personnel, actually bringing them in, getting them on board, just because it's so competitive out there. So I already know probably the government is probably struggling to retain these people already. You may not be getting, everybody you necessarily want, or the staffing needs as well too, because that's always an issue is getting funding. So this is problematic. And I think if you couple this with, recently I saw Hegseth ordered about $6 billion of contracts. I think it was more auxiliary services from some of your big consulting firms, your Accentures, your Deloittes, KPMG, people like that. So I'm not sure if any of that's involving in cyber as well, but it's definitely not something you need to be staffing down. It's, where the world is going, where technology is going, the amount of sensors and data that's just embedded in various products. Cyber is the last thing you should be cutting. You should definitely be staffing that up. So very, very, very reckless move, in my opinion.
I can guarantee you that America's adversaries aren't cutting staff. They're bringing more people in by the week. Training people up. Whereas in the United States, you got people cutting it, talking about they're trying to improve efficiencies. The Department of Government Efficiency thinks that they know how to better manage cybersecurity from a national security standpoint, I find that to be very, very questionable. That you have people driving the car that don't have a license at best. So I wanted to go into this here as well, because this is from CSO Online. A shift in U.S. cybersecurity strategy. Analysts suggesting these layoffs and funding cuts indicate a broader strategic shift in the U.S. government cybersecurity approach. Neil Shah, VP at Counterpoint Research, sees both risks and opportunities in restructuring. In the near to midterm, this could weaken the U.S. cybersecurity infrastructure. However, with AI proliferating, the U.S. government likely has a plan B, potentially shifting towards privatized cybersecurity infrastructure projects similar to what we're seeing with Project Stargate for AI, Shah said. If these gaps aren't filled with viable alternative, vulnerabilities could escalate from small-scale exploits to large-scale cyber incidents at state or federal levels. Signs point to a broader cybersecurity strategy reboot with funding likely being redirected toward more efficient and sophisticated players rather than a purely vertical government-led approach. This is not the this is not a winning strategy if you're in the federal government. This is not a winning strategy. I mean, you wouldn't replace the U.S. military with like Blackwater or something like that, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just not realistic, so to speak. And so I want to get to this piece here as well. Adding to the concerns, other critical cybersecurity programs have also been defunded, including the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EISAC, the center which provided cyber threat intelligence to election officials and state agencies, announced its closure after DHS pulled its funding. Meanwhile, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, a 20-year-old cybersecurity collaboration hub between federal, state, and local governments, is also at risk of losing support. Here's my perspective on this, Renaissance. What we're witnessing right now, from my perspective as a cybersecurity professional, is a disarmament. And I say disarmament primarily because when you think about the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, go back 2 years prior to that, 1989, when the Berlin Wall started coming down, and the Soviet Union started to retreat from East Germany back to Warsaw and back to Moscow. Think about that from a digital perspective. What you're basically doing is you're tearing down, or at least you're decommissioning your cybersecurity operations that are used to defend and actually manage a lot of the more critical aspects of your nation's security, which is vulnerability management. Vulnerabilities are usually the quickest way for bad guys and threat actors to actually exploit your environment, especially at the government level. And what is happening right now is tearing down of your nation's defenses through cybersecurity. And who thought this was a great idea? I have no idea. All I can say is, from who I've spoken to over the last month or so, it sounds to me that there's a lot of people who are very anxious as to what the next move is going to be. And there's a lot of people who are experts in what they do here that are not getting clarity as to what the next steps are going to be. See, it's one thing when you have tanks on the ground where you can just kind of fire up the tanks and gas up the tanks, and then you can pull them back from their line of contact. And I'm speaking in reference to what happened in 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. When it comes to cybersecurity, that's a different animal in itself, because now you're talking about people walking away from the keyboard and going somewhere else. Where that somewhere else is, I don't know. People are just not going to do their job anymore, and whatever happens, happens. And so I see this as a disarmament, because also you're also not sharing threat intelligence with Ukraine, who was once your ally just a few months ago or prior to January 20th, to not sharing any intelligence with them at all. And now they're also affected by this. They're also impacted by this. I couldn't have predicted this as someone who works in the industry. I could not have ever predicted that this would ever be the case, that you would have an administration come in, completely disarm, and have people walk away from their keyboards in the same way that the Soviet Union started to retreat under Mikhail Gorbachev in 1991 away from Eastern Germany and move their way back into Moscow. That was unpredictable. I would have never had thought this. Any thoughts on this, Renaissance Man?
Yeah, no. One other thing that came to mind was just we were talking about you're obviously seeing the cuts here, the cuts in the federal government as well too. It's really head scratching, because I do know I think we talked about this a little, maybe not on an actual webcast. Mm-hmm. Ironically, that if you're talking about cutting back cyber, cyber is something that also that you were probably going to see the U.S. probably use more under this administration as well, on going on the offensive. Because we've kind of been talking about it from more of a security standpoint, playing defense, but this could also just be limiting offensive capabilities as well, because I remember cyber has been pretty active. I know it ramped up with the tensions with Iran, I believe, under Trump the first time over a hacking of some of their systems, and then so that's the offensive side. But then even on the defensive side, I remember them talking about with Doge. I believe it came out the other day that one of the people who were working on the staff, was basically a whistleblower, was saying, hey, that basically the Russians were having backdoors installed into a lot of these systems that they were going and accessing with Doge, that basically someone can come in through a backdoor and pull this information, as well as they were taking some sensitive information, and I'm sure weren't handling it in the most secure way. So this is something that you're going to definitely have to keep an eye on, and I think it's going to be something that's going to get worse, in the sense of you're not going to see maybe the immediate fallout. It could happen as sort of targeted over time, depending on when you actually have an administration that's going to go in here and actually act in some sort of responsible way. You could definitely, it could take years really to really get this all repaired in the way that it needs to, because A, you need to really see all the damage that's been done. You need to actually have competent people there. Then B, you have to go and fix all this stuff that the administration seems to just kind of be taking a very laissez-faire, reckless approach towards.
Yeah, and the other piece that I probably should have covered in the beginning was the elections infrastructure, information security, right? Elections, you're talking about the midterms, you're talking about the national, the general election, right? If you don't have security assurances around the midterms coming up in the next year or so from now, you're going to be in some serious trouble in regards to sharing and collecting and sharing this information, and doing some analysis around what the sort of threats are going to be and what sort of vulnerabilities are out there inside some of these machines that are used to count the votes. You could potentially see some fraud going on with that. I know that before in 2020, there was a lot of accusations about certain machines, being hacked and, or being hackable. And now you're starting to see that the very safeguards that would be around that information sharing and assurance is now being, cut right before a midterm. I find this to be very convenient and timely when you're talking about cybersecurity and midterm elections coming up. It's not that difficult to see that all this calamity that's happening it has to be by design, because you're keeping people guessing as to what the next move is going to be, and no one really knows. And if you work in cybersecurity for the government, you're probably scratching your head as to what the hell is going on here. And so you're left with a lot of uncertainty. It's unfortunate that it comes down to this, but this is what we're dealing with here, and this is what this administration, this regime is doing. People are not really understanding on the outside what's happening on the inside, how it's really impacting people. This is something that most people really don't know, and I can't imagine that people who have voted for this or voted for this administration would be okay with this happening. Because if the idea is that someone stole the election 4 years ago, well, someone's really going to steal the election now if you don't have these security assurances around your infrastructure in your electoral system. So let's get to the last item here. Yeah, go ahead, right ahead, Renaissance.
No, I was gonna have one other thing too. Is I'm not sure. This may actually be where Democrats, it may actually be a silver lining or some irony, because I know they were trying to push for John Lewis Voting Rights Act under Biden, but couldn't get it through, which was going to like federalize a lot of the election processes. So it will be interesting to see if this actually works in their favor with the breakout of the states. Outside of Georgia, as far as the swing states, the rest of them are governed by Democratic governors. So it could be ironic that this actually helps in the sense of if it's able to be maintained and have a good foothold still at the state level. Although I'm not sure like what the cybersecurity infrastructure will look like as far as like the interaction between what the federal government does versus what the state does. Because I know the states ultimately are gonna certify the election results first, and then obviously the House will do the certification process as well.
Indeed. Next item is from Krebs on security. Trump revenge tour targets cyber leaders' elections. President Trump last week revoked security clearances for Chris Krebs, the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, who was fired by Trump after declaring the 2020 election the most secure in U.S. history. The White House memo, which also suspended clearances for other security professionals at Krebs' employer, SentinelOne, comes as CISA is facing huge funding and staffing cuts. The extraordinary April 9 memo directs the Attorney General to investigate Chris Krebs, no relation, calling him a significant bad faith actor who weaponized and abused government authority. The memo said the inquiry will include, quote, a comprehensive evaluation of all CISA's activities over the last 6 years and will identify any instances where Krebs or CISA's conduct appears to be contrary to the administration's commitment to free speech and ending federal censorship, including whether Krebs' conduct was contrary to suitability standards for federal employees or involved the unauthorized dissemination of classified information. CISA was created in 2018 during Trump's first term, with Krebs installed as its first director. In 2020, CISA launched Rumor Control, a website that sought to rebut disinformation swirling around the 2020 election. That effort ran directly counter to Trump's claims that he lost the election because it was somehow hacked or and stolen. The Trump administration and its supporters filed at least 62 lawsuits contesting the election, vote counting, and vote certification in 9 states, and nearly all of those cases were dismissed or dropped for lack of evidence or standing. When the Justice Department began prosecuting people who violently attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, President Trump and Republican leaders shifted the narrative, claiming that Trump lost the election because the previous administration had censored conservative voices on social media. Incredibly, the president's memo seeking to ostracize Krebs stands reality on its head, accusing Krebs of promoting the censorship of election information, quote, including known risks associated with certain voting practices. Trump also alleged that Krebs falsely and basely denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, including by inappropriately and categorically dismissing widespread election malfeasance and serious vulnerabilities with voting machines. We talked about that earlier. Krebs did not respond to a request for comment. Sentinel issued a statement saying it would cooperate in any review of security clearances held by its personnel, which is currently fewer than 10 employees. So here's the deal. This is a rabbit hole that we really don't have time to go down right now. And I'm surprised that you know, this person would not have been pardoned by Biden. Renaissance, you know, I would have thought that he, out of all people, should have been pardoned before Biden left the White House. But he kind of flew into my radar as someone that warranted that level of protection. What are your thoughts on Chris Krebs?
No, it's the latest in Trump's revenge tour. You know, Trump obviously still thinks he won in 2020, which it's weird. You know, I think once he kind of insinuated that he lost, and then, you know, he ran back to the same narrative that he won and that it was stolen from him. And then, you know, obviously Chris Krebs was the one who came out and said it was the safest election that they had, and said it was secure and fair. So obviously revenge tour. I think the reason you didn't see a pardon is you got to remember, you know, Biden and the preemptive pardons, you know, that was deemed as controversial even by, I think there are some people who were even Democrats who were uncomfortable, you know, kind of with the precedent being set there of, you know, preemptively pardoning people. So I think there's a lot of pressure to, you know, obviously he did everyone in his family because he knew Trump would, you know, kind of come and try to play dirty there. And I think Liz Cheney, and I think Benny Thompson, because of the January 6th commission, but, you know, that was really, I think that was it for the most part. So I think he's probably just one who kind of flew under the radar, just because, you know, like I said, a lot of people really didn't want the precedent being set of, you know, each outgoing president basically pardoning a whole group of people. And you even had some people who thought it was disgusting in their mind that he even pardoned his own family members. So I think Chris Krebs is kind of just, you know, kind of one of those people who fell through the cracks, and you know, we'll see if he can find a way to deal with any sort of retaliation. But he kind of reminds me of the same situation almost that Andrew McCabe was in with the FBI director under Trump. So.
All right, we'll get to our last item here. This is from Politico. Pentagon, former Pentagon official warns department dysfunction could topple Hegseth. Quote, the last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon. John Ullott, the former top Defense Department spokesperson, wrote in a Political magazine opinion piece. The Pentagon is in total chaos, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is unlikely to remain in his role, according to its former top spokesperson, who painted a scene of dysfunction, backstabbing, and continuous missteps at the highest level of the department. Quote, the building is in disarray under Hegseth's leadership, John Ullott wrote Sunday in a Political magazine opinion piece. The dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership. Ullott, who resigned from the Pentagon last week, described a department in collapse. He accused Hegseth's team of falsehoods about why 3 top officials were fired last week, saying they hadn't leaked sensitive information to the media. He chastised Pentagon officials for how they handled revelations that Hegseth shared sensitive military information in a signal chat, and he pointed to other leaks that caused embarrassment to the administration. The remarkable accusations by a former official who left only 2 days ago and insists he still supports the Trump administration's national security policies underscores the infighting and upheaval that has turned increasingly public in recent weeks. But he also found himself in the center of several controversies that added to that chaos. Ulott has sidelined after. Oh, sorry, was sidelined after he was defended. He defended the removal in March of a story discussing the service of a baseball legend, Jackie Robinson, part of a larger purge of diversity-related military web pages. Quote, the last month has been full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for the administration, he wrote. The Defense Department and the White House did not respond to requests for comment. The Pentagon on Friday fired top staffer, senior advisor Dan Caldwell, Deputy Chief of Staff Darren Selnick, and Colin Carroll, Chief of Staff to the Deputy Defense Secretary. Joe Casper, HEXF's Chief of Staff, will also leave his role in the coming days for a new position at the agency, according to senior administration officials. Politico was the first to report the firings and Casper's move, which one defense official ascribed to the personality clashes between the chief of staff and the other men. Quote, HEXF is now presiding over a strange and baffling purge that has left him without senior advisors, Ulott wrote. More firings may be coming, according to rumors in the building. The three fired staff backed up some of Ulott's claims in a Saturday post on X, saying they didn't know why they were terminated. The trio wrote that they, quote, have not been told what exactly we were investigated for, if there is still an active investigation, or if there was even a real investigation of leaks to begin with. They charge that unnamed Pentagon officials have slandered our character with baseless attacks on our way out the door. They expressed support for the Trump-Vance administration's mission to make the Pentagon great again, but did not mention HEXF, with whom they work closely. The terminations follow a purge of top military officers in February, including Joint Chiefs Chair General C.Q. Brown, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Linda Fagan, and Air Force Second in Command General James Slife. Even before he departed last week, Ulott's own role at the Pentagon was unclear. He wrote in an earlier statement that he was leaving because he and HEXF could not come to an agreement on another good fit for me at DOD. Ulott led communications at the National Security Council and the Department of Veteran Affairs during Trump's first term. He took the lead in the administration's first weeks in removing the Pentagon workspaces for several media outlets, including Politico, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, in favor of giving the spaces to other media outlets, many of them conservative. His comments will likely make more trouble for HEXF, who remains under investigation by the Pentagon's Inspector General for his use of signal to disclose sensitive information about airstrikes in Yemen. The New York Times reported Sunday that HEXF allegedly set up a signal chat with his wife, a former Fox News producer, and his lawyer, in which he disclosed potentially classified information on upcoming airstrikes against the Houthis. Quote, it's hard to see Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth remaining in his position for much longer, he wrote. Here's the deal. In government, there is an acceptable use policy for electronic devices, and that includes your cell phone. When you share any sort of critical information that is generated within the government on these electronic devices, and people who are not cleared through a security clearance to view this information, you have now compromised the government in this information as well. That being said, that's usually grounds for termination. I mean, it tells you that on the screen when you sign up and when you accept your role, acceptable use policy, data information security, all of these sort of things. You're put through all of these. You're put through a gauntlet of things that you agree to not share within and outside the government, outside of the purview of the government itself. Many private sector organizations also have this sort of agreement as well. They don't want you sharing business proprietary, what we call BPI, information to the greater public. There's usually classified levels of for information sharing, and I don't know if it was confidential. Well, obviously this is confidential. Military plans are pretty confidential, if not at the highest level. And the fact that he was using Signal just points to the inadequacies in skill set that Pete Hegseth had. I remember in the manosphere, in the Black manosphere specifically, there were a lot of people who were getting behind this guy, and they were saying, "Hey, this guy is it, man. He served in the military. He served in that on tour. And he served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he knows what he's doing." According to this, I don't think so. Renaissance, what's your take on this?
Yeah, you're 100% correct on what I refer to the sharing of classified information, or the responsibility to guard safe information, classified information. Mm-hmm. That includes, hey, if you're going to be discussing this with people, you need to be in a SCIF or in a secured environment for classified information. I know people who work in the classified space. You're literally talking about, you go into a building, the actual building that you go into or room that you're located in has to be specifically fitted for like classified. So there's all sorts of security requirements. I don't believe you can have windows. You can't take your personal cell phone into there. You can't work from home. You have to pretty much work from that computer. You can't even send it to information on an outside computer. I had a friend who told me once that she knew somebody who worked in one of those SCIFs, and they were working on something, and they sent a document from their work computer to their home computer just to go home and be able to work on it at night, and they got fired for that. So playing around with classified information or not keeping it safe is grounds for termination, like period, no questions asked. Hegseth should have been fired immediately. If any of us did something like that, we would have been fired immediately, no question. And Signal, I'm surprised. I don't know if it was on his personal phone or if it was on his government issued phone, but I'm pretty sure something like Signal is not even allowed on a government phone. You have TikTok that's not even allowed on government phones. So all of this is just it's really reeking of really incompetence. But some people are also saying that, hey, this is what Project 2025 says is, hey, try to transition using official channels to the Signal groups, I guess, because with Signal, information technically disappears after a certain amount of time. So trying to leave less of a paper trail for future investigations, things along those lines. But if this is an insider talking, it looks like it's a big deal. Once again, this guy said he was going to take the job and he wasn't going to drink, and I wonder if he is drinking or not. I would hope you are if you're making decisions like this, because if you're of sober mind and doing this stuff, then it really calls into question just your judgment in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And he will be considered to be the first person to walk the plank from Trump's picks within the first 100 days. If you go back to the first administration, there were a number of people who left within the first 100 days. Probably you can count on both hands, which is actually incredible. Nikki Haley, I think, she stayed around for about a year or so before she had left. But the point that I'm making here is that we knew that this person was incompetent during the Senate confirmation hearing. And there were people who pushed back and said, no, he's a great guy, and these were black men saying this. I find that to be interesting in itself. No, this is a great guy. He served our country and everything else. And then what we're looking at here is the most incompetent person that they could have ever have hired for this role who was proven to be incompetent by Senator Duckworth during the confirmation hearing, where he didn't even know what an ASEAN country was. He thought Japan was a part of ASEAN. I mean, this is the level of incompetence that we're dealing with here. And it's a reflection of the administration as a whole, that you have a person using Signal with LOL emojis everywhere, you know, laugh out loud, bombs away. You know, this is what came out of all of this. A Fox News host sending eggplant pics and to Tulsi Gabbard TG, you know. This is what came out of it, you know, Signal chats and emojis and things like that from Signal. Why they were using Signal, I really don't understand. I think the Pentagon and these folks already have their own sort of communications platform that they could have used. You know, there's a variety of platforms that they have internally that's not available to the general public. Why they would use something like this? Why he would choose to use something like this? I don't know. Maybe because that's the only thing that he probably knows. Doesn't even realize that there are other sort of secure protocol, secure communications platforms within the Pentagon and the Department of Defense itself. And so, but this just goes to show that, you know, the administration is incompetent, and this is one of the examples of incompetence.
Well, I'm thinking that, you know, once again, I'm thinking they're trying to skirt around these official channels, just because, once again, I think the purge probably has not gone, especially with DOD, it has not gone as far as probably Trump's wants at the lower levels or other levels, just because, you know, you got a lot of people who were in DOD. It's an agency that's over 2 million people. And you got a lot of people in there who, you know, are Republicans or, you know, former veterans, and they're not rocking with Trump as far as the stuff he's doing, just because they see how problematic it is. So I think you also run into an issue of, at a certain point, you can only fill these places with so many loyalists, and at a certain point, even they're going to be uncomfortable with some of the how you're playing in the red with some of this stuff, and just really jeopardizing national security. Because as it says in the article, you have people who would support the goals and aspirations of the administration. They just, you know, they can't roll with the incompetence. They know, hey, if we're going to go and do this stuff, it's got to be done a certain way just for security purposes. So I think that could be part of the rationale here, is to try to skirt around some of that resistance, as well as general incompetence, maybe just not knowing it's there. Because, you know, you fired CQ Brown within, what, a week of showing up on the job? So,
I mean, CQ Brown, for those who don't know, this was one of the highest ranking people in the military at the Pentagon, and a black man on top of that. You know, an incompetent white male was able to usurp a very distinguished black man in his position, and people think that this is a good thing, you know, for the country. This is what people are rooting for. That this is great. This is great for the country. And there's some black men who are like, hey, you know, we need to get rid of all this DEI. Yeah, including one of the first black men to be in that position, with the name CQ Brown. If you look at his chest, you know, with all those medals on it, and then you look at Hegseth, you know, you can see there's a clear difference between who's the adult in the room and who's not. Okay. Any last thoughts on this renaissance as to what's going to happen to Pete Hegseth?
Yeah, no, the only thing I'll say is, to your point on CQ, you know, you look at his chest and you'll see the medals. You look at Pete Hegseth's chest and you'll see, you know, some far right tattoos, and, you know, maybe even what people consider
Iron Cross.
Yeah, white supremacist tattoos. So, yeah, no, like I said, this is the trend of the administration, loyalty over competence, and, you know, as a result, you get stuff like this. So, no, that's all I really have.
Thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button on the way out, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust.